What is the real betrayal for you? Maybe it's when one of the spouses finds the other with another person. Or maybe it's when your best friend lies to you and spends time with other people just because he's bored with you. Everyone has their own view of betrayal. When she stepped into my office, I initially thought she was confused about the location. It's uncommon for someone to visit without first reaching out or scheduling an appointment. Even rarer are those who come alone. No one had ever looked like her before. She was tall and slender, her perfectly straight auburn hair styled into a graceful long bob. She seemed to be in her mid-30s, though her flawless skin and delicate features made her exact age hard to determine. Undoubtedly, she was a few years younger than me. Her pale blue eyes quickly scanned my office from left to right, as if assessing its contents to form a first impression before she began to speak. When her gaze finished its sweep and met mine, I felt as though I was being examined with the same meticulous attention. "Mr. Weber?" I leaned back from my microscope and stood up from my desk. "Yes, how can I help you?" "I hope you can. I purchased a painting that I suspect might be a forgery. I'm hoping you can determine if I'm right." She was straightforward. I already appreciated her directness. "I'll be happy to try." "No offense, Mr. Weber, but I expect more than that. I'm here because I've been told you're the best." "And who told you that?" She smiled. "Almost everyone, but I'm sure you knew that." "Almost everyone?" She didn't take the bait. "Almost everyone. You're not going to reveal the name of the unfortunate misguided person who tried to send you elsewhere." "Number, I don't think so." "It doesn't matter. I have a pretty good idea who it was. And please call me Adam." She walked over to my desk and extended her hand. "Karina." "Nice to meet you, Karina. So, tell me about this painting." We moved to what served as a seating area in my lab. A few mismatched chairs haphazardly arranged around a small wooden conference table with a wobbling leg. The artwork under discussion was a William Aiken Walker portrait of a sharecropper that she had acquired from a smaller Boston gallery 8 years prior. The artist's name didn't catch me off guard. There had been a widely reported incident in the mid-1990s involving forgeries of some of Walker's lesser-known pieces, but the purchase date was unexpected. Most of my clients consult with me either before purchasing or shortly after. "You bought this 8 years ago. Why are you bringing it to me now?" The more artwork I acquired, the more something about this particular piece felt unusual. "I'm sorry. I can't quite articulate it." "I understand. Often it begins with an instinctual feeling. We'll investigate further." I paused before adding, "You're aware, of course, that most galleries and auction houses I frequently work with only provide grace periods of—" "Yes. I realize too much time has elapsed for me to recover my funds if it turns out to be counterfeit." At least she was aware of the situation. "So, are you certain you still want to proceed?" She tilted her head and gazed at me with those striking blue eyes. "Wouldn't you want to find out?" she inquired. "I'm not a collector." "True, but what if you were?" I hesitated before replying. "Sometimes I question things. For example, if I truly cared about the artwork, would it make a difference?" Before becoming Michelangelo, he earned a living by forging ancient Roman sculptures. He would detach parts, hide the sculpture in a garden, and later claim he had discovered a masterpiece. One day, a cardinal realized the sculpture he had bought was fake. Instead of getting angry and having the artist imprisoned, the cardinal was so impressed by his skill that he invited him to Rome. She lifted an eyebrow. "It sounds a lot like you're trying to discourage me from doing business with you." I chuckled. "Not at all. Believe me, I'm happy to accept your payment. I'm interested in a Fourier transform infrared microscope. It's an incredible device, but very expensive. Every little bit helps." I'd be happy to contribute. I'll need a few weeks. Send me all the information you have about the artwork's provenance, and then I'll prepare an estimate. Have the painting shipped here, and I'll get started. I began to stand up, but then decided to take a chance. Or you could always bring it yourself, I added. She looked confused. Why would I do that? I immediately felt smaller. There was no good reason for her to personally deliver a painting worth nearly 6 figures to my office. I was speechless, but I spoke anyway, the words pouring out before I could organize them. I just meant, if it was easier to... I don't really know, I finished with a resigned shrug. She watched me stumble over my words with an amused smile, then said, "Oh, I thought maybe you wanted to see me again." She seemed to enjoy the bewildered look on my face for a moment before turning toward the door. I watched the graceful sway of her hips as she left the room and stepped out into the street. 5 weeks later, I found myself pacing my office, anticipating her arrival. For the 3rd time, I stopped to adjust the chairs around the conference table, having already fixed the shaky leg 3 weeks prior. I had invented a reason to present my report to her in person instead of sending it via email. I mentioned wanting to highlight my conclusions by referring to specific parts of the work itself. Although I offered to meet at a location more convenient for her, she insisted that my lab was suitable. She showed up 10 minutes before our scheduled 4 p.m. meeting, wearing a blue pencil skirt and a white button-down blouse. The painting was placed on the conference table. I took the seat in front of it, while she sat directly across from me. I set down 2 printed copies of my report on the table and handed one to her. I had invested in high-quality binding. She glanced at the report cover, folded her hands in her lap, and then looked up at me. "So, what's your conclusion?" Her tone was composed, showing no signs of anxiety about the outcome of my investigation. She likely realized I hadn't asked her to meet in person to share good news. Or perhaps she was so wealthy that it didn't matter to her. "It's a forgery," I stated, believing it's best to be straightforward when delivering bad news. "Actually, it's one of the best fakes I've encountered, but it's still not genuine." I watched her expression for any hint of surprise, disappointment, or anger, but she remained stoic and simply nodded. "I understand. How did you determine that?" "Well, the provenance appeared flawless. The documentation was expertly crafted, probably based on records from some of Walker's other works with minor tweaks. I suspect the forger even used period-appropriate typewriters. The details are vague enough to be suspicious, but there were no clear red flags." She leaned forward attentively as I spoke, resting her arm on the table and supporting her chin with her right hand. "The frame is also of excellent quality," I continued, flipping the painting over and tracing the edges with a stylus. "The wood was likely taken from furniture pieces from that era. It was clever to choose an artist who was active in the early 1900s. Finding matching wood is much harder when forging the work of an old master." I turned it around and used my stylus to replicate the movement of a brush across the canvas. The brushwork is impressive. It aligns with what you'd typically see in Walker's paintings. The signature matches too, though that's not surprising since it's the easiest part to counterfeit. And the pigments are nearly flawless. "Nearly?" she inquired. I grinned. "Nearly." I indicated some tiny white clouds in the midground. She leaned in to see where I was pointing, but realized she needed a better angle. She stood up and moved around the table, taking the seat beside me. Sliding forward and to the side, she positioned herself so that her right leg gently touched my left. She bent over the artwork and focused on the clouds. I conducted a chemical analysis of samples from different areas. The forger was knowledgeable enough to use lead-white paint, just like Walker. That's how the early counterfeiters of Walker's pieces were exposed. They had used zinc white instead. But here, I pointed to some yellowish grass strands at the base of the painting's subjects. "Notice this yellow? Chemically, it's very similar to a yellow pigment Walker commonly used. However, it's not an exact replica. This specific pigment variation is called Hansagelb, named after the German company that produced it. She looked at me skeptically. That seems a bit far-fetched. Surely you can't expect the artist to have used the same pigment in all his works. I assume he employed multiple types of yellow. That's absolutely correct, I responded. However, I researched the history of this pigment and discovered that American artists didn't have access to it until after World War II. It would have been difficult for Walker to obtain any, especially since he passed away in 1921. I had practiced that major disclosure multiple times before she arrived, and I turned toward her, eager to gauge her reaction. Her gaze had shifted from the painting to meet mine directly. "You truly care about your work, don't you?" she inquired. "Excuse me?" "The way you speak about it. Your eyes sparkle. It's refreshing to witness someone so dedicated to their craft." "Yes, I do love it," I responded, maintaining eye contact. "Except for the part about delivering bad news," I quickly added. "Actually, you seem to enjoy that aspect as well." I must have appeared embarrassed because she chuckled and waved her hand dismissively. "It's okay. I appreciate that you have a flair for the dramatic. Besides, you did warn me from the start that I might not be pleased with the outcome." She rose from the table and gestured toward the paintings adorning the walls of my lab. Each piece had a small handwritten note beneath it. She moved to the opposite wall and pointed to a portrait of a French nobleman. "I thought you weren't a collector," she remarked, tilting her head. "I'm not. Those were gifts from clients." "Forgeries you exposed?" I nodded. "The notes detail what revealed them. Eventually I'll turn them into engraved labels and properly frame them." She proceeded from one painting to another, occasionally stopping to inspect some of the artworks and read the accompanying notes. As she leaned over to read, I struggled to keep my eyes from lingering on the fabric accentuating the graceful curve of her backside. "Intriguing," she commented. "Though I'm sorry to inform you that I won't be taking your Walker. It might be counterfeit, but I like it too much. Plus, it would make an interesting story." She sighed. "A costly story, but an interesting one." "I noticed how much you paid for it in the provenance documents," I said. "If I realized I had lost that amount, I'd probably want a drink." I took a deep breath. "May I buy you one?" She paused mid-card reading, straightened up, and faced me. "Yes," she replied with a smile. "I think I could use a drink." We secured a booth at a bar close to my Brooklyn lab. She chose a martini, and I opted for a scotch. What began with one drink soon became two, then three. Our conversation flowed smoothly, and Karina's attitude gradually changed from strict and reserved to warm and playful. Watching her relax was delightful. A few times she reached over the table to lightly touch my arm while laughing at my stories. Occasionally she had to lean in to be heard over the music, giving me the chance to catch a few glimpses under her top. I thought I was being discreet, but she noticed at least once, as I saw her smirk and shake her head disapprovingly before settling back into the booth. "So who told me you weren't the best?" she asked. "What?" I replied, puzzled. She leaned forward, causing her blouse to shift and reveal a strap of her white bra. She paused, staring at me with a mischievous look, almost challenging me to look. "The day we met," she said louder, "you mentioned you knew who told me you weren't the best. Tell me who you think it was, and I'll let you know if you're right." I hesitated before answering. "Lauren Schrader," I said as neutrally as possible. She touched her nose with one index finger and pointed the other at me as if we were playing charades. But she was a bit tipsy, and her finger slipped from her nose to her cheek. It was adorable. "Why don't you like her?" she asked. "I never said I didn't like her." She laughed. "Oh, yes, you did. Come on, Adam, spill." As a matter of professional courtesy, I never speak ill of others in my field, not even Lauren. But whether it was the alcohol or just wanting to impress the beautiful woman across from me, I decided to drop my usual restraint that evening. She's a fraud. She doesn't take her job seriously. She sees herself as an unappreciated painter who only does forensic science to pay the bills until someone recognizes her talent. It's pathetic. She only got the in-house position at the Kiefer Gallery because she's sleeping with the head of the modern and contemporary art department. I finished my last sip of scotch and set the glass down a bit too forcefully. You really wanted that job, didn't you? No, I fibbed. Then, noticing her reaction, I added, all right, yes. But it's not just about bitterness. Or at least, not solely bitterness. Are you sure? No offense, but it sounds a bit like sour grapes. How do you even know she's seeing that guy? Because I was the one who caught them. Lauren is my ex-wife. Karina's eyes widened. Wow, I'm sorry, she said. That's in the past, I interrupted, smiling to show she knew I wasn't upset. So, I continued, wanting to shift the conversation and my own thoughts elsewhere, what do you do for fun when you're not collecting original artworks? Yacht racing? Vineyard management? Is it poke fun at the rich girl time then? It depends. Are you wealthy? Would a rich girl bother to be seen with someone as uncultured as you? Ouch, I responded, placing a hand over my heart. She laughed. All right, let me think. I'm good at guessing things. I leaned back and mimed stroking my chin dramatically as I looked at her face. You're a lawyer? Nope. CEO? Nope. Bank robber? She pressed her lips together and put a finger to them. Shh, don't tell anyone. Okay, I give up. I'm a freelance graphic designer. I work from home. Right, I said dismissively. I'm serious, she protested. Most graphic designers I know can't afford original walkers. Most graphic designers you know probably aren't living off a massive inheritance from their deceased parents. Damn it, I thought. I guess it's my turn to apologize, I offered. Don't be. It was a long time ago. I was 9. 9? I said, my jaw dropping. That must have been terrible. It was tough. I was an only child. They died in a car accident, and I moved to Ohio to live with my aunt. She was kind enough, but she never wanted children of her own or anyone else's. She worked as a conservator at the local art museum, so I spent a lot of time there either watching her work or just wandering the halls, looking at paintings. I used to lose myself in those artworks. I'd imagine what my life would be like if I could be part of those scenes. Lying on the grass at a summer picnic, watching ducks float on the lake, exploring a rustic farmhouse barefoot with my sister, standing atop a lighthouse listening to waves crash against the shimmering black rocks. Karina gazed thoughtfully into the distance just above my head, lost in her memories. Suddenly, her eyes darted back to meet mine. I suppose that's when I developed my passion for art. I'm not really an expert on any particular artist. I gather pieces that connect with me the same way those paintings did when I was 9. I'd be interested in seeing your collection sometime, I responded, genuinely intrigued. What about Friday night? She proposed. There's a fantastic Italian restaurant not too far from my place. You can take me out to dinner, and then we can stop by my home so you can show me all the other forgeries I've unintentionally acquired. I laughed and then shook my head apologetically. Sorry, that's not something I'm comfortable with. She seemed surprised. Why is that? You're well off, I explained. How about you take me out to dinner instead? Before meeting Karina, I was anxious that I might have dressed too formally for dinner. I looked quite sharp in my navy blazer and best pair of dress jeans, yet she was absolutely breathtaking. Her hair was styled in a tousled bun, and she wore a strapless black dress that perfectly balanced sensuality and elegance. A simple diamond necklace rested gracefully between her well-shaped breasts, which were perfectly proportioned for her slender figure. The dinner was exquisite, and our conversation flowed effortlessly and naturally. We enjoyed tiramisu for dessert and then hailed an Uber to her home. She resided in an impressive brownstone in Prospect Heights. The space was bright and airy, decorated with a minimalist touch. The few pieces of furniture she owned featured sleek lines and sharp angles. There was virtually no clutter. Everything appeared to have its designated place. "Wow, you're much tidier than I am," I remarked. "My thoughts are always so cluttered," she responded. "It's like I can't concentrate sometimes. This helps me stay calm." We strolled around her living room. Various paintings of different sizes adorned the walls. Some were prints, but most seemed to be original works. It was an eclectic assortment of artists, just as she had mentioned at the bar, and it was impressive without being showy. "Is that a Pissarro?" I inquired, stopping beside a painting depicting two women kneeling and conversing in a grassy meadow. "Yes," she replied, moving closer to me. Her hair was just inches from my face, carrying a faint scent of apple blossoms. "It's from his neo-impressionist phase. Not the finest example, but the best ones are way beyond my budget." With her body so near mine, I found it challenging to concentrate on our conversation. "What drew you to this particular piece?" I asked. "It's more about the emotions it evokes. Connection," she explained, intertwining her fingers as she spoke. "It shows two people taking a break from their daily routines to share something, perhaps a hidden desire or a dream of a different life." Most of the canvas features this vast, open space, yet the painting still conveys a deep sense of intimacy. As she spoke, my attention shifted not to the painting, but to a few strands of hair that had escaped from her bun and gently fell at the base of her neck. I found myself standing closer, close enough to feel her presence next to me. "Describe what you see," she asked, without taking her eyes off the painting, although she felt my proximity. I paused, choosing my words carefully. When I finally answered, my voice was quiet. "I notice small details. Freckles on your shoulder, a curl of hair lying on your neck. Here, surrounded by beautiful works of art, you are still the only thing that fascinates me." She stood silently, absorbing my words. Then I gently put my hand on her shoulder, feeling the warmth of her presence next to me. She leaned in slightly, and for a moment there was a quiet, unspoken connection between us, hovering in the atmosphere of the room. It was a wonderful moment. We were close. Eventually she hugged me and we relaxed, enjoying the simplicity of the moment. Her breathing became more regular, and soon she dozed off, lying next to me. Later she stirred and looked at me with a calm smile. "It looks like we still have some things to settle," she murmured playfully. A feeling of peace and warmth enveloped us. Our fingers intertwined as we lay side by side. I felt her breathing slow down, and soon she fell asleep. It was a quiet, soothing hug that did not leave me even after we dozed off. Our connection brought a sense of completion that lasted for a long time. Her proximity to my laboratory meant that Karina and I had numerous chances to meet regularly. Being a freelancer without a fixed routine, she often dropped by my office during the day, usually bringing lunch with her. Forensic work can be quite monotonous, so I appreciated her company. Our conversations spanned a wide array of topics. Traveling was one of her favorite indulgences, and thanks to the funds from her parents' estate, she had embarked on some incredible adventures. She had observed Komodo dragons in Indonesia, wandered through the Louvre in Paris, marveled at Iguazu Falls from the Argentine side, and explored Italy's museums. To match her stories, I shared photos of the impressive Sphinx and the towering pyramid I had seen in the deserts of Las Vegas, Nevada. Every now and then, she would inquire about my work and did a decent job of feigning interest as I explained the nuances of pigment analysis or demonstrated how to identify outdated fibers under a microscope. More frequently, though, she tried to lure me away from the lab, whether it was for a walk in the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, which is beautiful in the spring, or back to her brownstone, where we'd enjoy a leisurely afternoon in bed. Karina's regular visits brought back memories of the happy times I had early in my marriage to Lauren, shortly after we had started our business together. Lauren and I would also spend hours talking, and in those moments I couldn't believe how fortunate I was to be doing work I loved alongside the woman I loved. One afternoon, as we were wrapping up lunch in my office, Karina noticed me gazing intently at a painting on the wall, deep in nostalgic contemplation. "You're thinking about her, aren't you?" she inquired. "Yes," I confessed, "but not intentionally. Sometimes when I'm here, memories just surface unexpectedly." "You both must have spent a lot of time in this space together." It was the first time I realized that Karina might have been spending so much time in my office, not just to distract me from work, but also to help me move away from my memories of Lauren. "Kind of," I responded. Lauren handled some of the forensic tasks, but that was mainly my area. Her true strength was in marketing. She frequently visited city galleries to network and generate business. She was intelligent, beautiful, and convincing. Honestly, without her skills, we might have failed. "There wouldn't have been a service to promote without you," Karina countered. I grinned at her acknowledgement of my role. "You're right," I agreed. "I am pretty great." "Absolutely," she exclaimed, moving closer. "Check out that strong jaw and that attractive stubble." She gently touched my cheek and then moved her hand down to my chest. "You're built too. When I first met you, I imagined you fitting the cover of a rugged outdoorsman catalog, not working behind a microscope." "Watch out, you might inflate my ego," I joked. "If it weren't for the glasses," she remarked, pulling them off my face to examine my features, "I never would have guessed you're a hardcore science enthusiast." "Forget it. My ego is back to normal," I replied. "You're welcome," she said, giving me a quick kiss on the lips and placing my glasses back on. "So, what exactly happened between you and Lauren?" she asked, picking a crouton from my leftover salad. "It's a lengthy tale," I began. In short, I began focusing more on the business side than her artwork. Karina looked puzzled. "Can you give me a bit more detail?" We were both artists when we got married. Lauren was far more talented, and she aspired to succeed as a painter. In the early years, I did everything possible to support her. I juggled 2 jobs so she could dedicate more time to her art. I praised her work and helped her secure spots in various shows and exhibitions. I always believed that if our roles were reversed, she would support me in the same way. "But she didn't," Karina pointed out. "At first, she did. Starting the business was my idea, and she worked tirelessly to get it off the ground. However, once we began to gain some traction, things shifted. It reduced her painting time, and I no longer had the same capacity to support her. As our business flourished, her resentment grew. I think she felt I was prioritizing my dreams over hers. When she met Preston Richards during one of her marketing campaigns, she was craving attention, and he provided her with an exquisite experience," I continued. "Preston Richards?" Karina questioned. "Yes, he's the head of modern and contemporary art at the Kiefer Gallery." "Is that where Lauren works now?" she asked. I nodded. Lauren informed him that she was an artist, and naturally he requested to see her creations. He showered her with all the attention and support that I had ceased to provide, and she absolutely reveled in it. I'm not sure how long it took him to break her down, but it likely wasn't as lengthy as I'd prefer to think. The ironic part is, I genuinely believed our marriage was getting better before I discovered the affair. I had been dedicating less time to the lab and made a conscious effort to engage Lauren more about her art. I thought it was making a difference. She appeared more joyful, started going to the gym, began dressing more attractively, and even got a Brazilian wax. Karina looked at me with sympathy. For someone whose job is to detect fraud, you overlooked some pretty obvious signs. People tend to see what they want to see. I didn't want to view her as unfaithful. So, how did you realize? I let out a bitter laugh. In the most stereotypical manner, I returned home early. I felt unwell after lunch, so I went back to our apartment to rest. Lauren was supposed to meet a gallery owner downtown, but instead she was meeting Preston in our bed. Karina shook her head. What was your reaction? I can't recall everything clearly. There was a lot of yelling and screaming, that much I know. At some point I ended up punching Preston and later discovered I had broken his jaw. That must have felt satisfying, Karina commented. Truly satisfying, I replied with a smile. But after that moment I didn't feel okay for a very long time. Karina embraced me tightly, resting her head on my shoulder. I'm sorry. I wouldn't wish that pain on anyone, I responded. However, if it hadn't occurred, you wouldn't be here with me now. I can't imagine being anywhere else. Karina looked up at me. We kissed, and she returned the kiss. She broke away, stood on her toes, and gently kissed my ear. I know a way to help you move past the memories of your ex-wife that linger here, she whispered. Really? Yes. She playfully bit my earlobe. Let's create some new memories together. It sounded like a great idea to me. In the months that followed, I came to appreciate all the unique little quirks that surface at the beginning of a new relationship. Take Karina, for instance. She wasn't a fan of condiments like ketchup, mustard, mayo, or barbecue sauce, basically anything that altered the taste of food. She was also quite superstitious. She avoided black cats and ladders, and even kept her second bedroom locked because a mirror had broken there on her very first day. Karina loved musicals despite not being the best singer, which didn't stop her from joyfully singing songs from Les Miserables in the shower. One Saturday morning, I could hear her singing from the bathroom while I was looking through a kitchen drawer for an extra USB cable. At the back of one drawer, I found a folded brochure. Its logo immediately caught my eye. It was from the Kiefer Gallery. I took out the brochure and placed it on the kitchen island. It was promoting an upcoming auction with pages of photographs showcasing various paintings. It bothered me a bit that Karina hadn't mentioned her interest in an event at the gallery where my former partner worked, though I knew my reaction was a bit unfair. Still, it stung that she seemed to be hiding the brochure, making me feel uneasy. I put it back exactly where I found it and decided to wait, curious if she'd mention it on her own. Now I was the one keeping things to myself, but I didn't mind. Karina eventually came into the living room, where I was looking at a painting she had, a serene scene of a fisherman by his boat. She wrapped her arms around me, her hands resting gently on my chest. That's one of my favorites, she said softly. It's beautiful, I replied. All of them are. I turned to face her and kissed her forehead. Her hair was still damp from the shower. Thinking of adding to your collection? I asked. She looked up at me, a hint of hesitation in her eyes before her expression softened. Actually, yes, she admitted with a smile. There are a couple of pieces I'm interested in. That's wonderful. When's the auction? Next month? Which gallery? She looked away, almost sheepishly. All right, don't be upset, she said, glancing back. The Kiefer Gallery. Why would I be upset? I asked lightly. She took a breath. I don't know. I was just nervous about mentioning it given, well, you know. I'm sorry. I should have told you earlier. No worries, I assured her. I'm glad you found something you like. I hoped my remarks would reassure her, especially since I felt a bit guilty for attempting to corner her into a false statement. Instead, she appeared even more uneasy. "There's something else," she began. "If I win the bid, would you be willing to examine the painting for me?" I must have seemed taken aback, because she quickly added, "Of course, I'll compensate you. I'm not asking for a favor. It would just make me feel more comfortable if you took a look." I wasn't sure if she was trying to ease any potential hurt feelings I might have, or if she genuinely didn't trust Lauren to handle it properly. Either way, both were valid reasons. "Absolutely," I responded. "However, since it's from the Kiefer Gallery, I'll need to charge you double." She laughed and finally seemed to relax. "Then I'll be counting on your best work," she said, rising onto her toes to kiss me. I placed my hands on her back, feeling the warmth of her skin through the towel. "I always give it my best effort," I said with a smile. She let out a playful laugh as I lifted her, wrapping her arms around me to keep her balance. Together, we made our way toward the bedroom, sharing a quiet moment of closeness. She smiled, adjusting her towel, which began to slip slightly as we moved. With each step, her expression softened, revealing her warmth and affection. Sometimes, after completing an initial assessment of a painting, you might still feel a persistent sense that something is off. That's exactly how I felt after talking with Karina. When I get that feeling about a painting, I usually go over it a second or even third time to catch anything I might have missed initially. But with Karina, I wasn't sure how to proceed. Her visits to my lab had become rarer because she was deeply involved in a freelance project, so I mostly saw her during the evenings. I began taking breaks from work to drive by her brownstone at various times throughout the day. I wasn't certain what I was hoping to find, but nothing ever appeared unusual. Sometimes I would drop by unexpectedly with lunch. I convinced myself that I was doing this to reciprocate all the times she had brought me lunch when I was busy, but in truth, it was just a way to ensure she was really home. Karina was always pleased to see me and often invited me to stay and eat with her. I realized that my paranoia was rooted in trust issues stemming from Lauren's affair, and I feared that if I continued down this path, I would ruin a wonderful new relationship before it could develop. It wouldn't be the first time this happened. I decided to stop being so self-destructive. The issue was that I've never been good at keeping resolutions. One morning after leaving her place for work, I walked back and took a few loops along the side streets near her brownstone. After about 45 minutes, a man arrived at her door. I was too far away to see his face clearly. Karina answered and gave him a quick kiss on both cheeks before letting him in. My stomach churned, and for a moment I felt like I was going to be sick. I suppressed the nausea and reminded myself not to jump to conclusions. He could be a friend or a relative. Secret lovers typically don't greet each other with European-style cheek kisses, I thought. When I reached her place, she would probably offer a perfectly reasonable explanation and introduce him to me. I quickly messaged her as I hurried toward her door. "Hey, I forgot my charger. I'm nearby, so I'll drop by to grab it." She replied almost immediately. "Sure. Where is it? I'll come over to get it." "I'm not certain. Just let me in and I'll locate it. I don't want to disrupt your work." This time, her response took longer. "All right. Let me know when you arrive." "Already here," I sent back. "Wow, that was fast," she remarked, opening the door shortly after. "Sorry, I should have texted earlier." "No worries. I'm glad to see you. I wish you could stay, though." She pouted. "I'm feeling lonely." "Lonely?" I inquired. "Yeah, I'm stuck here working alone when I could be." I didn't wait for her to finish. I began climbing the steps, taking 2 at a time. Karina almost had to jog to keep up. "What's happening, Adam?" Her voice now had a hint of panic. "You never seemed like the superstitious type," I commented. What are you referring to? Not using your second bedroom because the movers shattered a mirror there. You're scaring me. I reached the hallway, striding toward the spare bedroom. Is he inside? I asked. Adam, listen. Open it, or I'll break it down. Just a moment. Wrong answer. I kicked the door forcefully. The hinges rattled but held firm. Stop it, please. I stepped back and kicked it again. There was a loud crack and the sound of splintering wood. I lifted my leg, ready to strike again, but before I could land the final blow, the door swung open. A tall man with long blonde hair and a prominent cleft in his chin stood in the doorway. He appeared to be in his early 50s. No need to keep knocking. I heard you. Please come in. He spoke with a French accent and motioned toward the room. I pushed past him and surveyed the area. A large window at the far end bathed the room in light. Various antique wooden furniture pieces were leaned against the right wall. Some items seemed disassembled or broken into smaller parts. In the corner, a simple white mattress with a single pillow lay on the floor. Across the room stood a long wooden table scattered with jars of various shapes and sizes. Most contained paint, while some held brushes. Next to the table was a small wheeled shelving unit, stocked with additional paint supplies. In the center of the room was a large easel supporting a partially completed painting, a still life unmistakably in the style of Henri Matisse. Karina spoke in a calm and measured tone. Adam, this is Maxime. I glanced at the man and then at the white mattress in the corner of the room. Karina followed my gaze. Maxime is not my romantic partner, she clarified. He's my business partner. He specializes in procurement. She gestured toward the furniture and paint. Pigments, canvas, wood, everything I need. He's the best in the world at what he does. I wouldn't be anything without him. Karina gave Maxime a warm smile. She is too modest, Maxime said to me. She has a natural talent. She could use a child's brush and finger paints and still create something brilliant. He then turned to Karina. I think I'll give you some privacy, okay? Thank you, Maxime, she replied. He turned and left the room. I watched him go, still too stunned to speak. Karina and I stood together in silence, both staring at the canvas in the center of the room. She seemed to understand that I needed time to absorb and process everything. The walker you brought to my lab, I said. You painted it. On our first night together, I told you my motives weren't entirely pure, she responded. Why bring it to me? Out of curiosity. I wanted to see if you were as skilled as people say, but I also needed some information. I could almost hear the pieces falling into place in my sluggish mind. She intended to sell her forgeries through a gallery with the least competent possible forensic scientist, but she needed me to reveal who that person was. She had first tried to extract the name from me in my lab. She mentioned that someone had said I wasn't the best, but she wouldn't disclose who. I thought she was just protecting her source. But the truth was, she had no source. She had fabricated the claim, hoping I would provide the missing information. She tried again at the bar. Tell me who you think it was, and I'll let you know if you're right, she had said. She assumed I would name someone I held in low regard, someone she believed could be easily deceived. And foolishly, I had given her Lauren's name. Even more foolishly, I had told her how Lauren had cheated on me. Karina's eyes had widened when I mentioned it, not out of sympathy, but because she couldn't believe her luck. Not only did she get the name she wanted, but she also knew that Lauren would never consult me for the analysis of her paintings. I was livid and ashamed at how effortlessly I had been deceived. The brochure, I responded. You're not purchasing an item from the auction. You're putting one up for sale. She grinned, and I could feel my rage almost boiling over. I should report this to the police immediately, I declared. And inform them about what? she answered serenely. That your girlfriend is painting in her bedroom? Then I'll contact the Kiefer Gallery. I'm certain they'd want to know that one of their auctioned paintings is counterfeit. They won't take you seriously. Why do you think that? You mentioned it yourself. People tend to see what they want to see. Everyone likes to believe they've discovered something unique. It makes them feel special, too. My role is to help them maintain that belief. Is that what you did with me? Deceive me into thinking I found something unique? Don't say that. What we share is different. You know it. What we have is an illusion, a fabrication. We have nothing. She seemed as if I had slapped her. Maxime was furious with me, you know. He accused me of being foolish, of taking too many risks. I knew he was right, but I didn't care. I wanted to be with you. Once I had a name, I was supposed to end it. Every day I promised myself I would, yet each day I found reasons to see you again. Even now, a part of me hopes that somehow everything will work out. My pride desperately wanted to trust her, but I knew she was merely toying with me, manipulating me once more. That's nonsense, I retorted. You only stayed around to watch me in action, to figure out how I caught others, so you wouldn't get caught by me. For the first time, her eyes flashed with anger. You think I'm a prostitute? That I slept with you for months just to extract information about forensics? You're not that skilled. Yes, I am. She chuckled. So full of yourself. I don't need your assistance. Do you have any idea how successful I've been? You wouldn't stand a chance of identifying one of my works. I already did. Only because I told you I suspected it was a fake. That's why you'll be caught eventually, I stated, because you believe you'll never be. I turned around and began to walk away, unable to stay near her any longer. My mind was overwhelmed with a whirlwind of emotions. She held onto my arm. Please don't go. Her voice trembled slightly, and tears welled up in her eyes. It was a convincing display. Was any of that sad story you shared about your parents, living with your aunt, roaming the museum halls and losing yourself in paintings actually true? Her expression revealed everything I needed to understand. I forcefully pulled my arm free. The day we first met, she recalled, I asked if you'd like to know whether a painting you owned was fake. You responded that if you truly cherished the artwork, its authenticity wouldn't matter to you. Do you remember? I do, I replied, but I don't love you, Karina. Tears streamed down her face as I exited the room and began descending the stairs. Where are you going? She shouted after me. I'd reached my limit with the deceit, so I decided to be honest. Away from you, I confessed. I turned off my phone and checked into a hotel for 2 days. I needed some space to think and didn't want Karina attempting to locate me. I opted not to involve the police. While I might have been able to persuade them to look into the matter, they wouldn't have any solid evidence. Besides, I wanted to catch her myself and compete on an even playing field. I found it unlikely that someone from the gallery was assisting her from within. That would only complicate things and add unnecessary risks. Moreover, I was certain Karina preferred deceiving someone over bribing them. My next task was to identify which paintings she had forged. I flipped through the auction brochure I had brought along. It featured numerous landscapes and still lifes, artworks very similar to those Karina displayed in her home. It seemed probable she would continue working in that style. However, something she had told me before I left kept echoing in my mind. She had mentioned that everyone likes to believe they've discovered something special. I turned to the front page of the catalog, which highlighted the auction centerpiece, a newly discovered portrait by Modigliani. That would certainly fit the bill for something special. But was she really that arrogant? Modigliani was one of the most frequently forged artists of the past century, partly because he had a reputation early in his career for exchanging canvases for rent money in Paris. This made the provenance of some of his works difficult to verify and easy to counterfeit. As a result, any of his paintings up for auction, especially a newly discovered one, would face intense scrutiny. The risk was substantial, but so was the potential reward. An authentic Modigliani could sell for millions. If this was Karina's move, then my next destination was unavoidable. It was the place I least wanted to visit, but the one I most needed to go to. Lauren's laboratory was nearly double the size of mine. She had access to the newest versions of all the equipment I used, along with several tools that I lacked. My gaze lingered wistfully on the FTIR microscope tucked away in the corner. "How have you been, Adam?" she asked, her tone dripping with insincere warmth. "Are you seeing anyone?" My jealousy, mixed with irritation at her patronizing cheerfulness, was already making me angry. "Nope. Has Preston proposed yet?" "Marriage is an outdated concept. Preston doesn't subscribe to it." "That's nice. You two share that." Her jaw clenched in frustration, but she quickly regained her composure. "What do you want, Adam?" I was relieved that we were done with the facade. "You're planning to auction a new Modigliani. Interested in bidding?" "I'm afraid it's beyond your budget, unless your business has taken a turn for the better." "I'm not looking to purchase it. I want to inspect it." She chuckled. "You traveled all this way to ask a question you already know the answer to." "I'm serious, Lauren. I'd like to examine it." "Why?" "Because I suspect it might be a forgery." "That's nonsense. Why would I deceive you?" "Oh, I don't know, Adam. Here's a thought. Maybe you're still upset that I got this job instead of you. You want to believe that you're vastly superior to me and that my only reason for being here is my relationship with Preston. Admitting that I might also be competent at my job would shatter your fragile ego. Well, surprise. You're not the only one who knows how to operate a microscope." "It's not about that," I began, but she kept interrupting. "So, to get back at me, for the affair and for my landing this position, you want me to label an authentic Modigliani as a fake. The moment I do, the gallery could be sued for defamation. Significant damages have been awarded in cases involving false forgery accusations. You know this as well as I do. Later, when the painting is proven genuine, my reputation and career would be destroyed. Wouldn't that be a perfect FAQ to your ex-wife? I'm not trying to undermine you, Lauren. I'm simply asking to examine it. I'll handle the risk. You want the gallery to take their most valuable piece from this auction and outsource its authentication, instead of relying on their own forensic expert? What impact do you think that has on my reputation? No chance. You're not getting near that painting. So, you've finished your forensic analysis? Of course. You're certain it's authentic? Without a doubt. And what gives you that confidence? Because its provenance includes contemporary photographic evidence. She beamed at the astonished expression on my face. When it came to verifying a work's provenance, a contemporary photograph was almost as valuable as the Holy Grail. This immediately made me doubt whether my suspicions about the Modigliani were accurate. Perhaps Karina was too clever to take such a significant gamble. Maybe her painting was one of the more discreet pieces in the auction. "You don't trust me," she remarked. She pulled a folder from a drawer and quickly sifted through its contents. Triumphant, she produced a black-and-white photograph and handed it to me. The image depicted a middle-aged man sitting at a wooden table, holding a partially folded newspaper while having breakfast. To his right stood a stylish grandfather clock, and the Modigliani was displayed on the wall to his left. I examined the photograph, noting the thickness and dimensions of the paper. "It seems like it was taken with a box camera," I commented. "Judging by the size, I'd say it's a Kodak Brownie too." She nodded, still wearing that self-satisfied smile. I took out my phone. "Is that okay?" I asked, indicating the photograph. "Go ahead," she replied. I captured a photo and returned the original to her. "Are we finished here?" she asked, not really as a question. "I'm definitely finished with you." "Good. You can leave now." I was halfway out the door when she stopped me. "Adam," she called. I turned to face her. Never show up unannounced at my workplace and try to pull something like this again. I don't need your professional advice, and if I did, I'd fucking ask for it. I might have achieved greater progress with Lauren if I had mentioned Karina, but that would have required me to reveal that I had unknowingly been dating a master forger for several months. I wasn't willing to disclose that humiliating fact, especially to Lauren. Additionally, Lauren was more likely to think I was collaborating with Karina rather than being deceived by her. I wanted to avoid that kind of trouble. However, to be honest, I chose to stay silent because I was protecting Karina as much as I was protecting myself. Despite assuring Karina in her studio that I didn't have feelings for her, I actually did care for her. After my divorce, I had successfully shut myself off emotionally, making me unprepared to confront these feelings. I wanted to stop her, but I also didn't want to hurt her. The problem was I wasn't sure if I could prevent her. I no longer trusted that the Modigliani was genuinely Karina's work. Even if I had confidence, I would need to prove it was a forgery without being able to examine it directly. I tend to think most clearly under pressure, so I decided to create some leverage. I contacted Nora Turner, the owner of the Kiefer Gallery, and requested a meeting. Nora was a no-nonsense woman in her 70s who had dedicated her career to enhancing the reputation of the Kiefer Gallery. She had become one of the most influential figures in New York's art community. I knew Nora didn't tolerate incompetence, but I also knew she was deeply invested in maintaining reputations. She was aware of mine and was determined to protect her gallery's standing. I informed her that I had crucial information about the Modigliani and that it was important for her, Lauren, and the seller's representative to attend the meeting. I also emphasized the need for discretion. She agreed. Before ending the call, she thanked me for reaching out and joked that if I were wasting her time, she'd castrate me and display my testicles in a special exhibition titled Hubris. I secured my meeting. Now all that was left was to come up with a plausible reason for it. A week later, I found myself in the waiting area just outside the conference room of the Kiefer Gallery. My hands were restless in my lap, and my right leg tapped incessantly on the ground. I couldn't determine if this was a poor decision, which typically indicated that it was. Suddenly, the main door swung open, and Nora Turner entered the waiting area with purpose. She walked quickly in my direction. Just before she reached me, I managed to stand up from my seat. "Mr. Weber," she greeted. She didn't offer her hand, only gave a nod. "Miss Turner," I replied, "I appreciate you setting this up. Everyone has arrived. Did you inform them of my arrival? Number." They're both very intrigued about the reason I called this meeting. Her gaze sharpened as she looked directly into my eyes. "I'm intrigued as well." She pivoted on her heel, and I followed her into the conference room. Without hesitation, she threw the door open and began speaking before we even stepped inside. "This is Adam Weber, an independent forensic expert. Adam, I believe you are acquainted with Lauren Schrader." Lauren gave me a fierce look that felt like she was trying to intimidate me right then and there. "And this is Georgiana Wilkes," Nora continued, pointing to a chair where Karina was seated. "She represents our anonymous seller." Karina stood up from her chair, gave me a friendly smile, and reached out her hand. If she were surprised to see me, she didn't let it show. "Mr. Weber," Karina greeted in a precise British accent, "very pleased to meet you." I was taken aback that she had decided to act as her own contact for the gallery, which significantly increased her visibility. Most forgers preferred to remain completely anonymous. However, Karina was always confident in her skills. Nice to meet you, Miss Wilkes, I responded, shaking her hand. Are you from England? Actually, Wales, she corrected. Really? I've always wanted to visit Carmarthenshire to see St. David's Cathedral. Oh, it's definitely worth visiting, Karina said, though I'm afraid you won't find much in Carmarthenshire County. St. David's is in Pembrokeshire. Of course. My mistake, I admitted, trying to offer an embarrassed smile. Nora had shared some information about the cellar with me, so I had reviewed some geography beforehand. Karina had deftly avoided my trap. Either she had done her own research, or she was only pretending to have an American accent while keeping her Welsh one genuine. We all sat down around the elegant conference table. I placed a manila envelope in front of me, and Karina glanced at it. Please excuse me if this seems blunt, Mr. Weber, Karina began, but I have to admit I'm a bit puzzled as to why you're here. There's no straightforward way to say this, Ms. Wilkes, I replied, but I'm afraid the Modigliani you're selling might be a forgery. Lauren laughed mockingly. You're unbelievable, she retorted. Karina acted shocked. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Weber. I wasn't aware you had the chance to examine the painting, she said, looking sharply at Nora. He didn't, Nora responded, clearly irritated by Karina's implication. He doesn't understand what he's talking about, Lauren interjected. I was the only one who examined the painting, and it passed with flying colors, not a single anachronistic pigment. Did you date the frame? I asked. What? The wood. Did you determine its age? Lauren glanced nervously at Nora before regaining her composure and speaking as if writing an essay. Considering the pigmentation analysis results and the provenance, I didn't think it was necessary in this case to— It's necessary in every case, I interrupted, my tone full of contempt. Synthetic fibers? I continued, not allowing her to answer. Did you check for any foreign substances embedded in the paint? Of course. I always perform spot checks for— How many spots did you examine? This is absurd. Why? I'm sure you mapped out a grid and marked each section you inspected to calculate a specific percentage. Not doing so for a piece of this significance would be gross negligence. So, what percentage of the grid did you spot check? Fuck you, Adam. There was an uncomfortable silence. I let it stretch out, struggling to keep a smile from forming on my face. Do you possess any evidence to back up your assertion, Mr. Weber? Nora inquired. Or are you simply here to settle old grudges? For your benefit, I hope it's not the latter. He lacks any form of evidence, Lauren responded. Unfortunately, that's yet another instance of your inadequate attention to detail, I remarked. Remember when you showed me a photo of the painting's owner having his breakfast? You were even considerate enough to let me take a picture. I retrieved 4 copies of the photograph from my manila envelope and distributed them. As I've mentioned to Ms. Turner, the individual in this photo isn't the original owner, Karina explained. He purchased the portrait during a trip to Paris from a landlord who rented to Modigliani. Upon returning to New York, he displayed it in his home as a joke, finding the elongated neck amusing. He and my client's great-grandfather were business associates, and both the painting and the photograph were exchanged as part of a gentleman's agreement to settle some old debts. It has remained in my client's family ever since, but only recently did they recognize its worth. Naturally, they prefer to avoid the spotlight that comes with such a discovery, choosing to stay anonymous. Did the man in this photograph have a name? I questioned. I'm fairly certain he did, Mr. Weber, Karina replied, a trace of irritation in her tone. Most individuals do. However, we haven't located any records of it. Of course not. I turned to Lauren. And what did your undoubtedly thorough analysis of the photo uncover? Lauren looked back at Nora. This time she responded confidently, swiftly listing a series of detailed observations. Black and white photograph measuring 2 1/4 by 3 1/4 inches, captured with a Kodak Brownie 2 and developed in a darkroom. shows signs of wear consistent with its age. The subject is dressed in period-appropriate attire. The furniture and dinnerware also match the era. Additionally, the subject is holding a newspaper with the date clearly visible. "I always thought that was a bit too obvious," I commented. "I'm glad you see it the same way." "What?" she responded, confused by my reaction to her strong point. "The newspaper, positioned just so, allowing us to see enough of the front page and masthead to identify the date, June 13th, 1919. It almost seems orchestrated." She chuckled. "It's staged because of how he's holding the newspaper? That's pathetic, Adam, even for you." "Did you know you can purchase rare and vintage newspapers?" I said, disregarding her remark. "It's a niche market with limited sellers, so I contacted all of them." I glanced at Karina. Her face remained unreadable. I informed them I was searching for a copy of the New York Times from June 13th, 1919. Most responded that they didn't have it. But do you know what one gentleman in Seattle told me? He said, "That's incredible. We've never had a single request for that date, and now we've received 2 almost consecutively." He mentioned that someone else had bought one 6 months prior. I turned my attention to Nora. "Ms. Turner, my memory isn't as sharp as it used to be. Could you remind me when you mentioned that this Modigliani entered your gallery's collection?" 5 months back." "That's quite an interesting coincidence," I remarked. "A coincidence alone doesn't prove the photograph is staged, Mr. Weber," Karina replied. "Absolutely, Ms. Wilkes, absolutely," I agreed, rising to my feet. "Nonetheless, there's something unusual about this photograph." I approached her chair and indicated a specific area on the photo she was holding. "Take a look at the grandfather clock's face," I instructed. "It reads 8:05, Karina observed. "What's strange about that?" Lauren inquired. "Nothing at all. I believe we can all agree that 8:05 a.m. is a perfectly normal time for breakfast. Isn't that right?" I glanced at each woman to emphasize that my question was genuine. Nora nodded in agreement. Lauren gave a nonchalant shrug, while Karina remained still. "It's not the time itself that I find peculiar," I continued. "It's this." Using the tip of my pen, I pointed to the grandfather clock's face. This clock features a moon dial, which is difficult to discern in the original photograph without magnification. I've taken the liberty of enlarging it and making several copies. I took the enlarged images from the envelope and circulated them around the room, giving Karina a subtle wink as I did so. As the name suggests, the moon dial indicates the current phase of the moon. It's calibrated to complete half a rotation every 29.5 days, matching the lunar cycle's duration. "That's roughly how long you've been talking, Mr. Weber. Can you get to the point, please?" Nora interjected. "Certainly. The convenient aspect of the moon and stars is their predictable movement across the sky, much like—" I tapped the photo. "Precisely, like clockwork. This allows us to work backwards and determine the moon's phase on virtually any date, even over a century ago. On June 13th, 1919, there was a full moon. This makes me question why the moon dial on this particular clock displays a waning crescent." A heavy silence settled in the room, growing so dense it felt suffocating. Karina was the first to break it. "This is ridiculous. The clock could easily be stopped or broken." "If that were true," I responded, "then why does it show what we've all agreed is a completely normal breakfast time?" I glanced at Lauren and Nora, both of whom were now staring at Karina. "How should I know?" Karina retorted. "It was 100 years ago. Perhaps the owner didn't mind the moon's phase, or maybe he simply didn't set the dial correctly." "I believe you've touched the right point, Ms. Wilkes," I said. "However, I don't think it was the clock's owner who forgot or incorrectly set the dial. I suspect it was the forgers." Karina was correct. I did take some satisfaction in delivering unwelcome news. "Well, I think you're grasping at straws, Mr. Weber. Moreover, If you or this gallery intend to tarnish my client's reputation with unfounded claims of forgery, we will pursue our legal rights to seek compensation." "Enough with the nonsense," Nora interjected. "You won't be taking anyone to court. I'm not convinced the painting is a forgery. There's simply insufficient evidence." I was taken aback. "But surely you still plan to auction this piece?" "It's my gallery, Mr. Weber. I'm confident I can make any decisions I see fit." I glanced over at Karina, who was smiling. "However," Nora continued, rising from the table, "given the inconsistencies regarding its provenance, I'm also doubtful that the painting is an authentic Modigliani. I'm not willing to jeopardize my gallery's reputation over a piece I'm not certain is genuine." She turned to face Karina. "We'll have to decline your painting, Ms. Wilkes. We'll remove it from the auction and return it to your client, thanking you for considering us and wishing you success in finding another gallery that better meets your needs." Karina's smile faded. "You understand, of course, that once you remove it, every gallery worldwide will regard it as a forgery, even if you don't explicitly state so. As influential as I might be, I haven't yet gained the ability to dictate how other owners manage their galleries, Ms. Wilkes. Goodbye." With that, Nora left the room swiftly and decisively, just as she had entered. A month later, I was nearly done packing up my laboratory. It was unexpectedly emotional. I had built this business from the ground up and created many memories in this space, some joyful, others less so. It felt like a part of me, making it difficult to leave behind. Next week, I was set to begin my role as the head of forensic research at the Kiefer Gallery. Nora had offered me the position just days after our initial meeting. It seemed our small gathering had convinced her to expand the department. She was keen on bringing someone from outside the gallery since she had recently lost faith in her current staff's capabilities. Nora informed Lauren that she was welcome to continue as my direct subordinate. Surprisingly, Lauren declined the generous offer and resigned on the spot. When Preston learned that I had accepted the job, he decided it was time for him to seek better opportunities as well. I heard he had moved away from New York, and Lauren had relocated to San Francisco for a fresh start. It's always unfortunate to lose valuable team members. About a week after our meeting, I visited Prospect Heights. I didn't expect to run into Karina, and wasn't shocked to find that her brownstone had been empty for weeks. The property was rented out fully furnished, with the tenant having paid the entire first year's rent up front. There were still 2 months left on the lease. Taking a break from packing, I reviewed the latest resumes I had received for Lauren's position. Having never had an assistant before, I wanted to ensure I selected the right candidate. While I might be skilled at evaluating paintings, I still had much to learn about assessing people. A knock on the door broke my concentration. A FedEx driver had left a large package on the sidewalk. I carried it to the conference table and opened it. Inside was a painting, with no protective packaging around the frame. As I removed it from the box, I realized why. It was the walker that Karina had painted. Attached to the frame was a handwritten note. Adam. I hope this finds a place of honor on your wall. It's an early piece, so it's somewhat rough. I like to believe I've grown a lot since then. When you view it, I hope it brings back fond memories of our time together. I certainly do. It's unfortunate you never got the chance to examine the Modigliani. I doubt even you could spot a flaw. I suppose we'll never know. That was impressive work at the Kiefer Gallery, but you caught me on a technicality, so we'll call it a tie. Given our professions, I'm sure our paths will cross again. When they do, I bet you won't see it coming. However, I hope you prove me wrong. I enjoy surprises. Karina. I couldn't help but smile, as arrogant as ever. Only Karina could lose millions and call it even. Looking at the stack of paintings I'd taken down from my office walls, I realized that what I had told Karina on that first day wasn't entirely accurate. I was a collector. Specifically, I collected forgeries. Each painting in my collection had its own story. Karina's piece was my prized possession, a masterpiece created by the master forger akin to Da Vinci, and it held the most intriguing story of all. Sadly, it was a story I could never share. Only the two of us knew its true history. I hoped that someday we might have the opportunity to add another chapter to it.